Hello everybody and welcome to the Stormkeep. My name is Paul and I have a quick video for you today. Since we just got the battle profiles for all the heroes and we know which units can be included in their regiments, I thought it would be good to make a video to discuss how this whole process works, because it seems this isn't the most intuitive of all mechanics. Before we start today's video, I'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor of our podcast, Layton Gaming. Formerly known as Kaiju Gaming Lounge, Layton Gaming is located in Orlando, Florida. They supply all the prizes for the Stormkeep painting contest, and they carry our brand of dice and 7-inch measuring sticks. They are rebuilding their website right now, and will be back online soon. Thank you again to Layton Gaming for sponsoring our podcast, and on to the show. So let's talk about the basics of list building first. An army is made up of some combination of regiments and auxiliary units. You can have up to 5 regiments, and you can have anywhere from 0 to technically any number of auxiliary units. A regiment is led by a hero. You can add 3 units to that regiment, and the general's regiment in particular can take 4. Now, at the very basic level, you can make a list that is 1 hero and any combination of any units, and that would be a legal list. There's no limits on how many behemoths or artillery or cavalry or infantry. There's nothing like that. The game allows you to put any combination of any units in your army, and it is a legal list. Now, the only restriction is that you have to have at least 1 hero in your army in order to be a general, but there's no limit on how many times you can include that hero, unless it's unique, of course. So you could, if you wanted to, make a list that's just 6 Carnosaur Old Bloods. That's the list, That's a legal list in 4th edition. Now, just because you can do anything doesn't mean you should do anything, right? There's obviously going to be rules that encourage you to build armies in a, proper way, something that isn't spamming the most powerful unit you can find in your book. Obviously, there's synergies between units that make them stronger than the sum of their parts. But in addition, there's also the fact that each regiment is 1 drop. So if you don't have, if you just have a bunch of auxiliary units, like if you have 6 Carnosaurs, that means your army is going to be 6 drops total. And that's, not ideal, because that gives your opponent control over who gets to go first in round 1. The other really, really big reason to avoid just spamming whatever auxiliary units you want is that the player with the fewest auxiliary units gains 1 CP per round. Now, this specifically is the player with the fewest, so if both players have 0 or both players have 2, then neither player gains this bonus. But if you have 1 auxiliary unit and your opponent has 0, then you're giving them 1 command point every round, and that is really, really bad. You don't want to be doing that pretty much with any army. The extra command point is very, very good. I mentioned regiments briefly earlier. There are specific units that go into these regiments, and each hero can bring specific units into theirs. And it's usually like a thematic kind of thing. Like if you have a Lord Celestin on Star Drake, he's the leader of the Extremist Chamber, so he gets to bring Extremist Chamber units. He's also a Lord Celestant, so he can bring Warrior Chamber units. These are usually narrative hooks found throughout all the different armies. If you want to see which units can go within each regiment, just take a look at the latest battle profile document found on warhammercommunity.com. Some units, usually War Masters, they can bring any unit in their army in the regiment. You can see in the example on screen that the Celestant Prime, he is a War Master, and he can bring any Stormcast Internal keyword unit into his regiment. Now, some hero units can even be brought in other heroes' regiments, and each army has a different name for these kinds of units. Some of them are pretty wacky, like if you look at some of the destruction names, they're quite silly. Some of the more serious armies, like Stormcast, have a more serious name. For example, we have the Knight Vexillor, who can be brought as a Stormcast Exemplar. The Knight Questor fills this category as well. And these will take up the spot of a normal unit regiment. So if for example, you bring a regiment that has, let's say, Gardas Steel Soul, he can bring a Exemplar, which could be a Vexillor, and then you can bring 2 additional units. Now, if Gardas is your general, that regiment could be 4 units. These kinds of heroes that fit into other heroes' regiments, we call these lieutenants internally. That's not an official term. It's just like a name that's kind of catching on. Now, the General's Regiment is of particular importance right now, not just because you could include 4 units instead of the regular 3, but there are seasonal rules that benefit having units in your General's Regiment. Also worth noting that if your army has any units with the War Master keyword, then a War Master unit must be your General. Now, the War Masters also usually allow you to bring any unit into their regiment. I haven't seen one that doesn't yet. There are seasonal rules for putting units in the General's Regiment. For example, you can pick one of these very powerful Honor Guard abilities at the start of the game. These are very powerful, very flexible. One of them gives your units extra rend against specific unit types. So for example, if your opponent is playing a Gargant list, you can pick one of your Honor Guard abilities to be anti-monster, and then one of your units gets to get extra rend against that unit, against all monsters. And if you're facing Gargants, well, they're all monsters, so that is pretty good. Priority Target is also very powerful. Your unit gains +1 to hit rolls and +1 to wound rolls when attacking any enemy unit in the enemy general's regiment. And that bonus works on shooting as well, not just melee. The last ability is Bodyguard, which gives your general more protection. So if you're running something like a Krondys or a Karazai, and you feel like they might just get swamped, might get taken down in melee combat, you can assign your Honor Guard to be a Bodyguard, which reduces the number of attacks enemies have against that general by 1. That's a very, very powerful effect. Many units in this game have, 2, 3, 4 attacks, and reducing those attacks by 1 is an enormous boost to effective health. Now, it's not all upside for the General's Regiment. You'd think you'd want to cram as many units in there as possible, and you might, especially if it's a War Master, it can be, any kind of unit, so you could bring really niche stuff that you'd normally have to take as auxiliary otherwise. But there is a downside. Every single unit in your General's Regiment has a target put on their back, because there is a battle tactic called Slay the Entourage, where you have to pick an enemy unit in the General's Regiment and destroy that this turn. So if you put something like, 3 Aether Wings in your General's Regiment, you're effectively feeding your opponent 2 victory points at some point throughout the game. Very easy battle tactic to score. So you don't want to give your opponent an easy target, but you also want to get a lot of value out of that powerful Honor Guard ability. So you've put all of your units together, you figured out which units you want to bring, what heroes you need to bring them, or vice versa. You picked which heroes you want, and then you figure out which units you want to put in them. The final touches on list building in 4th edition are fairly straightforward. You pick a battle formation, which is like a sub-faction. You get an army-wide bonus usually. Sometimes it affects only units with specific keywords. You can see the Thunderhead host on screen here as one such battle formation. You can pick a heroic trait for any hero in your army. These are usually nice bonuses to either their offense or defense or some kind of new supporting ability. You can pick an artifact, which usually has a powerful effect. Sometimes they're once per battle effects that can really swing the momentum of a game. You can also pick a spell lore. All wizards in your army will learn all the spells in that chosen lore. It's not like in 3rd edition where you had to pick specific spells for specific wizards. All the wizards in your army learn all the same spells. There's also something similar with a prayer scripture. All priests in your army learn all the prayers in the chosen scripture. And finally, you get a manifestation lore. Now, these are a little bit more complicated because there's many to choose from. There's only one spell lore and one prayer scripture for most armies right now. You can expect more to be added as the edition goes along. But there are many manifestation lores. You can pick a bunch of different endless spells to summon. We will have a full video breaking these down at some point in the future. So putting all this together, let's take a look at a sample list. You can see this list, and I will say this is not necessarily a good list, right? You shouldn't go out and play this just because you're seeing it on the podcast right now. This is just for demonstration purposes. You can see this list has 3 regiments. The first one is led by a Lord Aquilor, who has taken the Staunch Defender heroic trait and the Mirror Shield artifact. Now, his profile says that he can take any Gryph-hounds unit and any Vanguard Chamber keywords unit. So in his regiment, I've put a unit of 3 Vanguard Palladors with shock hand axes. They are a Vanguard Chamber unit, and I've put 6 Gryph-hounds. In the second regiment, there's a Lord Relictor. His battle profile says that he can bring 0 to 1 Stormcast Exemplars. Those are those lieutenant-type units that we talked about. He can also bring Gryph-hounds. He can bring any Ruination Chamber keyword unit, and he can also bring any Warrior Chamber unit. You can see in this regiment there's a Knight Vexillor. He is tagged as one of these Stormcast Exemplar units that can go inside these battalions. These are the lieutenant-type units that we've been talking about, so I've slotted him into this regiment. And finally, since the Lord Relictor can take Ruination Chamber units, I've decided to add in a unit of 6 Reclusians. In the final regiment, we have Andrasta. She is a War Master, which means she has to be our general in this list. We don't have a choice. We can't pick the Lord Relictor or the Lord Aquilor. It has to be Andrasta. And Andrasta can pick any Stormcast Eternal unit in her regiment. To demonstrate this, I've thrown in an Extremis unit of 2 Dracothian Guard Concussors. I've thrown in a Vanguard unit of 3 Vanguard Raptors with Hurricane Crossbows. And I've put in a Reinforced unit of 10 Vanquishers from the Warrior Chamber. This all adds up to 2,000 points on the dot. The battle formation I've picked is Sentinels of the Bleak Citadels. That way that Reclusian unit can get a 5-up ward in every hero phase. The spell lore I picked is Lore of the Storm, even though in this list it won't matter because I don't have any wizards. The prayer lore is Prayers of the Stormhost. That's the only one we have access to at the moment. So the Lord Relictor will learn all 3 of the prayers in there. And the manifestation lore, again, won't matter as well because we don't have any wizards in this list. But you can see the general format of how you structure a list, how you pick your regiments, how you pick your heroes, how you pick the units that go with those heroes. There's a lot more to it than this. Obviously, you want to pick units that synergize together, but I was seeing a lot of confusion about how this whole regiment system works. So hopefully this video has done a pretty good job in making this whole thing a little bit more intuitive. All right, thank you everybody for watching, especially our Patreon supporters. If you think I missed anything in this video, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you want to talk about AOS, join us on the Stormkeep Discord server. We talk about AOS all day, every day. Consider supporting us by becoming a member on YouTube or joining us at patreon.com/thestormkeep. For $5 a month, you can get early access to all our videos. Coming up next on the podcast, we've got a review of the General's Handbook 2024-25, which will include the battle plan, seasonal rules, battle tactics. We will be discussing how this season's rules shape our list building and our approach to battles. We're also working on our index review series, where we will do in-depth reviews for armies like Seraphon, Stormcast, and a bunch more. I'm also considering a lore series, maybe talking about Stormcast army structure, or why Marathi is the horniest person in all the realms. If you guys would be interested in a lore series with this voice for some reason, let me know. I'm gauging interest on this sort of thing. And with that, we'll close out the video. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.